In this lesson, we're going to look at the consequences of market failures. Let's revise the definition of a market failure quickly. Market failures occur when a market is not operating efficiently. There is a shortage of a certain good or service. It is not delivered by the market or not delivered in the correct quantities. Now, the consequences are inefficiency, and we have to distinguish between productive inefficiency. That means we are not using our resources to their maximum capability, not producing the largest possible output at the lowest possible cost, or allocative inefficiency, where the types and quantities of the good or service being produced does not represent what consumers really want, or it is not in the best interest of consumers. Then we have externalities, which refer to the cost borne by society because of private consumption. And when markets fail, it is the role of government. It is really important for government to step in and intervene to try and reduce the effects of the market failures. And they do it with all of these steps, which I'm going to discuss in detail as we continue with the lesson. Let's look at inefficiency. How does inefficiency occur? This is a little throwback to grade 10, where we look at our production possibility curve. The production possibility curve indicates how we use our resources. And when we utilize all of our resources in a country or in a firm to produce good A, we will be able to produce a quantity of this good. Any movement along this curve still illustrates productive efficiency, even though at this point we gave up some of good A. We call this opportunity cost. In the process, we gained a lot of good B. It is unfortunately not yet possible for this specific economy or firm or country to produce at this level. Yes, it is something to aspire to, but with our current resources, this level of output is currently unattainable. Oh, and this is where a problem comes in. We are producing inside our production possibility curve. We are not using our resources effectively. This leads to market failure. I mean, think about this logically. Who in their right mind would be happy with this quantity of good A if they can have this quantity of good A by just using the resources that they have to their disposal? Now, where on the PPC should production take place? I mean, it can be so many different places. How do you choose? And this is where your indifference curve comes in. An indifference curve looks at the combination of goods which will give consumers the same level of satisfaction. They don't care. They will consume a lot of good A and a little of good B, or give up some of good A in order to get more of good B, or give up more of good A as long as they can have more of good B. So anywhere where your indifference curve intersects with your production possibility curve indicates allocative efficiency. You are using your resources to their best possible capacity, but also satisfying consumer wants and needs. When we look at negative externalities, if social costs were added to private cost, the final price of the product would be pushed up, so fewer goods would be supplied. Think about the demand for cigarettes. Let's say the demand for cigarettes is represented by line D, and the supply of cigarettes, the marginal private cost, is represented here. According to market equilibrium, this is the price that we charge for cigarettes, and this is the quantity that is being consumed. Now, if you were to take the results of lung cancer or other respiratory disease due to smoking or the inhalation of secondhand smoke into consideration, the marginal social cost would be a lot more than the marginal private cost. if you were to pay for your lung disease in increments with every packet of cigarettes that you purchase now, the purchase price would be a lot higher. So over here, it represents a socially inefficient consumption or production of this good with a negative externality. For this to be socially efficient, we need to sell cigarettes, not where the MPC intersects with the demand curve, but where the MSC intersects with the demand curve. If you were to pay a socially efficient price for a good that has a negative externality, at this quantity, your price should have been there at P2, which is a lot higher. And like I stated, the socially efficient output requires cigarettes to be sold where MSC intersects with the demand curve. And this decreases the quantity that is being supplied and consumed then at the higher price. The triangle over here represents your external cost, or the cost that would have been borne by society if these products are consumed. What does the government do to address negative externalities? Now, governments carry out campaigns in order to change or persuade people from consuming goods with negative externalities. Think about the warning messages that you find on cigarette packs, or the fact that they want to remove any branding or nice packaging designs from the cigarette packs in order to make it less appealing. There were even campaigns where they want to use the pictures of diseased lungs on the cigarette packs to constantly remind people of the negative effects thereof. There are also the levying of taxes on the goods, sin taxes, which makes the product more expensive, or the government actually passes laws and regulations that prevent activities that will encourage the use of such products. Think, for example, children under the age of 16 are not allowed to purchase tobacco products, or children under 18 is not allowed to buy alcohol. That is by law. Then we have our positive externalities. If people were to acknowledge the social benefit of certain goods, they would demand a lot more of that good. And an increase in demand, a shift of the demand curve, means that the price of the good will also increase. So if you think about the benefit associated with education, currently, this is the supply of education, and because of the limited resources that we have, it's not really possible to increase the supply of labor drastically, of education, but we need to get more people to demand goods with positive externalities. The problem with an increase in demand is an increase in supply. This gives you a real indication of the worth of education. Big problem is that at an increased price, where the socially desired output level or consumption level is, prices are higher, and a lot of learners won't be able to afford education at the higher price. But this triangle over here represents the external benefit of consumption of goods with positive externalities. We want people to consume a lot more of these products. Our marginal private benefit is less than our marginal social benefit, or marginal social benefit exceeds marginal private benefit. What does the government do to encourage the use of goods with positive externalities? They usually advertise the benefits on radio or television, or they will step in knowing that, you know what, yes, we want people to demand more of these goods. this leads to the price being too high, unattainable for a lot of people. So they will step in and subsidize education, healthcare, or other services, or even provide it free of charge. Now, one of the questions I get asked quite often is, how are we supposed to know which graph indicates a positive externality and which graph indicates a negative externality? And that is why I put them here next to each other for you. For negative externalities, we want producers of this item to produce less of this product, because producing less will increase the market price. And an increase in the market price means the quantity demanded will actually also decrease. When it comes to positive externalities, we want people to increase their demand for this product that will have a positive social effect. Thing is, with an increase in the demand, it also goes with an increase in the price. And remember, this is important because an increase in price will also increase the quantity that producers are willing to render at the increased price. Governments also implement rules and regulations by means of direct controls. So they literally pass laws, or they use the existing legislation that they have to try and control or constrain the behavior of businesses, industries, and individuals. Just a few of these, let's think about environmental acts, where we try to reduce the negative effects on the environment when it comes to production. We have the Protected Areas Act, Biodiversity Act, the Coastal Management Act, Air Quality Act, Waste Management Act, etc. Direct control by government. Or we have imperfect markets. Now, most businesses operate in a non-competitive market, so they maximize their profits by supplying less than the optimal quantity of a good or service at too high a price. By allowing international competition, we can limit the harmful practices of local monopolies. Think about British Airways. They were allowed to compete with SAA when it came to domestic flights. This forced SAA to keep their prices in check. Otherwise, domestic travelers would have chosen British Airways to complete their domestic travel with. Other instances include the removal or the reduction of tariffs on imported goods. This will make local markets more competitive. Remember, we add tariffs to artificially increase the price of our imported goods. So by removing these tariffs, South African businesses must adapt and respond so that the international products don't take preference over theirs. And then we also have competition promotion by the establishment of the Competition Commission, Competition Tribunal, and the Competition Appeals Court, which was discussed in Lesson 3 of Perfect Markets. Governments implement minimum wages, maximum prices, and minimum prices. And because these graphs are quite intricate, I'm going to do each one of them individually. With minimum prices, politicians and unions argue that workers, particularly our unskilled workers, are at a disadvantage when it comes to negotiating their employment conditions. They can't really secure real wage increases, and this means that their wages remain low. This leads to unfair income distribution, which is a market failure. And to solve this, the government introduced labor laws to help protect especially our vulnerable people. They introduced a minimum wage rate, and with implementation on the 1st of March 2020, this amounted to 20 Rand 76 per hour. When the government implements minimum wage laws, employers are not allowed to pay their workers less than the minimum wage rate. Now, at a higher wage rate, the supply for labor increases quite drastically. I mean, regardless of your skill set, if you can get a lot of money, you will give your services. Problem is, many employers feel that either the wage earners aren't worth the increased wage, or they literally just cannot afford to pay the increase in the wage, which is more than the market equilibrium price. And this means the quantity of labor demanded decreases, which will inevitably lead to job losses. Another problem that we have is that our trade unions argue our minimum wages at this rate of 20 Rand 76 per hour is still not enough for a South African to maintain a minimum standard of living. When it comes to maximum prices, governments will set the price of a good or a service at a maximum level. And this is usually applied to goods such as basic food, housing costs, public transport, petrol, paraffin, diesel, etc. And your maximum prices are to ensure that everybody has the same access to these goods or services, and to help the poor to also get access to these goods. Maximum prices are also referred to as price ceilings, and it is set below the market equilibrium price. Even though consumers and producers agree on this market price for these goods or services, the government steps in and says, this is the ceiling price. As a producer, you are not allowed to charge more than this price for the good or the service. The ceiling price just states, you cannot go higher than the roof. So what happens? At the lower price, the price ceiling, the demand for the product increases. And according to the law of supply, the quantity supplied decreases. This will inevitably lead to a market shortage, and unfortunately, black markets can also arise. When it comes to minimum prices, the governments intervene to ensure that sufficient quantities of certain basics are provided, for example, maize, and this is done to ensure food security in a country. The problem with staple foods is that the price is too low. So the quantities supplied may not be enough to actually sustain the country. So the government comes and they set a minimum price, also referred to as a floor price. This is the minimum price you are allowed to charge for these products. So even though the market price is lower than the floor price, you are not allowed to go lower than the floor. And because the price is higher, suppliers are willing to offer increased quantities of this product. The law of demand, on the other hand, states that at a high price, the quantity demanded for these products are lower. Think about the price of green peppers. If green peppers were to become extremely expensive, people would just not buy them anymore. And this causes a market surplus, and it leaves producers of this product with a big problem. What are they going to do with these surplus goods? How are they going to dispose of it? So what happened is other countries dumped their product in developing countries, especially your developed countries, dumped their subsidized agricultural produce in developing economies, which caused a lot of negative effects on those economies. Dumping means you sell the product below the cost price of this product in a foreign country. And the World Trade Organization stepped in and they now prohibit dumping. So the only other alternative for producers are to destroy the produce, or they have to use it as animal feeds. The governments intervene by also using taxes and subsidies to recover the external costs. So if we levy a tax on a product, it will increase the price of the product. And at the increased price, the quantity demanded of this product decreases. The increase in price also leads to a decrease in the supply of a product. What happens is, if you take environmental taxes, the government imposes green tax on the business because they pollute, which increases cost, or they will force a business to adopt production methods, which will decrease their emissions. And all of this is expensive. At the higher price, like I said, quantity demanded decreases and the supply will shift to the left, increasing the price, decreasing the quantity consumed. When it comes to subsidies, your governments provide producer subsidies in order to encourage producers to increase their supply. So what happens is there is a subsidy paid, decreasing the price of the product, and this will, at the lower price, increase the quantity that is consumed. And it can also increase the supply of the business so that the increase in demand, in the quantity demanded, can be met. The governments also redistribute income and wealth. And it is very important because the market system is really neutral when it comes to income distribution, that the government uses a combination of taxes, transfer payments, and subsidies to realize effective redistribution. Now, traditional methods include the levying of taxes such as progressive income tax or secondary taxes, indirect taxes such as VAT. The government provides certain services free of charge to those who do not have it, or they provide services in kind, cash benefits to the poor. And then other redress methods include the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, affirmative action by means of the Employment Equity Act, land redistribution and restitution, and property subsidies for RDP housing. The governments can also actually become involved in production processes. Now, when we did the chapter on the public sector, we look at the importance of the public sector in Module 3, and the government must step in and supply goods where there are missing markets, because these are usually necessities. So your public sector steps in, supplies the desired good directly, and this is usually funded through income taxes, indirect taxes, and wealth taxes. Or you have your community goods. Community goods may be provided in one of the following methods, free of charge. Fortunately for you, you do not have to pay the police, or you're not supposed to pay the police when they come out to your house for whatever crime was committed. Or you have user fees, where individuals who actually have the privilege to access services such as refuse removal, waste disposal, sewerage, and drainage, some individuals pay for it. Or the provision of some collective goods, which is being subsidized. Now, if you think about public transport and clean water, yes, people pay for these goods, but definitely not the market price. The demand for these goods are so high that the market price would be too high for most people to be able to afford it. And then the government steps in and subsidizes these community goods. Governments also have macroeconomic objectives. Now, for all governments, it is to achieve economic growth, full employment, price and exchange rate stability, and equity. And if any of these objectives aren't met, it is a market failure and the government intervenes. They do this through demand-side policies, which includes your monetary and fiscal policies, And then they can also apply supply side policies, which focuses on the capability of the economy to expand the stock of their factors of production, to improve their infrastructure and the flexibility of their markets in order to expand production. And that is it for this lesson. In our next lesson, we will look at our cost benefits analysis.